He thought humiliating a quiet waitress on live television would earn him the biggest laugh of the night. But Victor Langford had no idea he was seconds away from destroying his own reputation in front of millions. The Grand Harmony Charity Gala glittered beneath towering crystal chandeliers in downtown Manhattan, every marble column wrapped in gold light, every round table filled with CEOs, celebrities, and donors dressed in gowns worth more than most people's monthly mortgage. Cameras floated silently between them, broadcasting every polished smile to homes across America. At center stage stood Victor Langford, America's favorite late-night host, a man adored for his sharp wit and even sharper habit of turning ordinary people into punchlines. Tonight, he was especially hungry. Ratings had slipped 3 weeks in a row, sponsors wanted more viral moments, and Victor knew exactly what television audiences loved most: watching someone small squirm under a spotlight. His tailored white tuxedo gleamed as he paced the stage with a microphone in hand, throwing rehearsed jokes at senators, singers, and billionaires, drawing obedient laughter from the ballroom. But his restless blue eyes kept searching for something better, something raw, something unscripted. Then he saw her. Near the far Champagne station, half hidden behind a pyramid of crystal flutes, stood Clara Bennett. 36 years old. Plain black catering dress. Sensible low heels. Blonde hair twisted into a modest knot that had begun to loosen from hours of work. She moved quietly, almost apologetically, refilling glasses and lowering her gaze whenever wealthy guests brushed past, as if she were part of the furniture. To everyone in that room, Clara was invisible. And invisible people, Victor had learned, made the easiest targets. A slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, stretching his words with theatrical excitement, "I think our gala just found itself a surprise guest performer." Several cameras swung instantly toward him. "You, sweetheart. Don't be shy." A few guests chuckled before they even understood the joke. Clara's shoulders tightened. She glanced behind herself as if perhaps he meant someone else. He didn't. "Bring our mystery songbird up here," Victor said, snapping his fingers toward the floor crew. The audience laughter grew louder now, sensing the delicious discomfort of a public setup. Clara shook her head lightly. "Sir, I'm just working," she said, her voice barely audible even from 10 feet away. Victor pressed a hand dramatically to his chest. "Oh, that humble too? America loves humble." More laughter. 2 production assistants were already guiding Clara toward the stairs as cameras zoomed in on her flushed cheeks. Her tray was removed from her hands. A microphone was placed into fingers that instantly began to tremble. On the giant LED wall behind them, in bright, playful letters, the producers flashed. "Can the waitress sing?" The ballroom erupted. Some guests leaned forward with amused cruelty. Others lifted phones beneath the table despite the no-recording policy, sensing something embarrassingly entertaining. Victor circled Clara like a ringmaster admiring his chosen act. "Come on," he purred into the microphone. "Just a little tune. Unless the stage is too fancy." Clara swallowed hard. The lights felt hotter than July asphalt. Hundreds of eyes pinned her in place. Somewhere beyond the cameras, the orchestra members exchanged uncertain looks. Victor smiled wider, smelling blood in the silence. He believed this was the moment America would laugh with him. He had no idea this was the exact moment the room began to belong to her. Clara Bennett stood motionless beneath the white blaze of the television lights, her fingers wrapped around the microphone so tightly that her knuckles lost all color. Laughter rolled across the ballroom in polished waves, not loud and vulgar, but elegant and poisonous, the kind of laughter rich people used when someone else had been selected for embarrassment. Victor Langford fed on it. He tilted his head, flashing that nationally beloved grin, and rested one hand on Clara's shoulder as if they were sharing a charming, spontaneous moment, instead of a carefully engineered humiliation. "Do not tell me our beautiful gala waitress is camera shy," he teased, drawing another ripple of amusement from the tables nearest the stage. Clara lowered her eyes. She could feel the lenses tightening on her face, every tiny screen in the control room magnifying the flush in her cheeks, every viewer at home waiting for her to stumble through some awkward nursery rhyme. This was exactly how these moments worked. A person was isolated, spotlighted, stripped of ordinary dignity, then offered to the crowd as harmless entertainment. Victor had done it to interns, audience members, even a nervous state senator once. But tonight there was something especially satisfying in the way this quiet woman seemed too small to defend herself. "Tell us your name," Victor said. Clara hesitated. "Clara. Just Clara?" Victor asked dramatically. "Like Cher? Like Madonna? America loves mystery." More laughter. Clara swallowed. "Clara Bennett." Victor nodded as if interviewing royalty. "And Clara Bennett, how long have you been blessing this room with sparkling water and absolute terror?" A few guests covered their smiles with manicured fingers. Clara answered softly, "Since this afternoon." "Perfect," Victor said. Fresh enough not to know she should have run when she saw me. The orchestra chuckled uneasily. Clara's chest rose and fell a little faster now, but she remained polite, almost painfully polite, which only encouraged him further. He thrived on compliance because compliance made the next push feel deserved. "So Clara," he continued, pacing in front of her, "everyone in America has a hidden talent. Some juggle, some yodel, some make excellent meatloaf. What do you do?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truthful answer sat behind her teeth, buried under 10 years of silence and ash. Victor leaned closer. "Nothing? Oh, come on. You have got to give me something. Can you sing?" The room sharpened. Clara looked at him for the first time directly. There was no challenge in her face, no anger, just a quiet plea for mercy that Victor interpreted as weakness. "A little," she admitted, and the ballroom burst alive. Victor slapped his thigh as if he had struck comedy gold. "There it is, ladies and gentlemen. We have ourselves a singer." On the giant LED wall, the playful words changed from "Can the waitress sing?" to "Let us find out." Even the producers in the side booth were grinning now, because the segment was becoming exactly what viral television demanded. Discomfort wrapped in chandeliers. Clara's breathing slowed, but not because she was relaxing. Something else was happening beneath the humiliation, something colder. She could hear the clink of forks, the rustle of silk gowns, the faint mechanical hum of the cameras sliding on their tracks. Strange how clear ordinary sounds became when a person was being cornered. Victor held out one manicured hand toward the orchestra pit. "Maestro, give our Cinderella something easy. Maybe Happy Birthday." The conductor offered a hesitant smile. Several guests laughed louder than before. Clara's jaw tightened. Her thumb traced once along the metal body of the microphone, as if touching something familiar after years of exile. Victor saw the motion and mistook it for panic. He stepped back, savoring the room, savoring the expectancy, savoring the certainty that in less than a minute this woman would produce a shaky little tune and hand him one more national punchline. But Clara Bennett was no longer listening to the laughter. She was listening to the silence underneath it, and for the first time that night, it was beginning to answer her. The conductor lifted his baton halfway, still wearing the uncertain smile of a man who assumed this was all harmless television theater, but Clara's voice stopped him before a single note could be played. "Not Happy Birthday," she said quietly. The words were soft, yet they landed with such unexpected steadiness that Victor Langford blinked. For the first time since dragging her under the lights, he looked at her not as a prop, but as a person capable of interrupting his script. A murmur passed through the nearest tables. Victor recovered with a chuckle. "Oh, our guest artist has preferences." He turned theatrically toward the orchestra. "You hear that? Diva requests already." More polished laughter followed, though thinner now, because Clara had not smiled, had not fumbled, had not given the audience the clumsy panic they were expecting. She stood with her shoulders still, chin slightly raised, eyes no longer darting for escape. Victor narrowed his gaze. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. "All right then, Clara Bennett," he said, dragging out her name with playful sarcasm. "What would Madam like?" Clara looked past him toward the orchestra pit, toward the aging conductor in his black tuxedo, and something almost imperceptible changed in the man's expression as he met her eyes. Recognition did not strike him yet, but curiosity did. "Puccini," Clara said. A fork dropped somewhere in the ballroom. Victor laughed too quickly. "Puccini? Well now, somebody has been watching PBS." Several guests laughed on reflex, but the sound did not swell the way it had before. The conductor lowered his baton. "Which piece?" he asked, no longer smiling. Clara inhaled once. "O mio babino caro," key of E minor. This time the silence moved faster than the laughter. It slipped across the room like a draft through open doors. Two violinists exchanged sharp glances. A pianist straightened on his bench. At the VIP table near the stage, renowned music critic Eleanor Voss slowly lowered her wine glass. Victor felt it immediately, the microscopic shift every performer dreads, that subtle transfer of audience attention away from the host and towards something unscripted. He forced another grin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our waitress apparently came with a soundtrack. But even he heard it now. His joke sounded smaller. Clara was no longer shrinking beneath the spotlight. She was settling into it. Her trembling fingers loosened around the microphone. Her breathing deepened. Somewhere behind the calm in her face, old doors were opening. Doors she had welded shut a decade earlier when she disappeared from every concert hall that once printed her name in gold. She remembered velvet curtains. She remembered standing ovations that felt hollow after the funeral. She remembered newspaper flashes, interviews, condolences, and the one night she walked away because singing had begun. To feel like grieving in public. For 10 years, she had buried Clara Bennett, the performer, beneath aprons, payroll forms, and catering schedules. She had learned the discipline of being unseen. But humiliation has a strange way of resurrecting what pride keeps alive. Victor stepped beside her, lowering his voice so only the nearby microphones caught the false warmth. You know, if this gets too scary, you can still back out. He wanted the audience to hear generosity. Clara heard condescension. She turned her face slightly toward him. I am not scared, she said. The sentence was simple. No anger. No drama. Yet Victor's smile flickered for a fraction of a second. Because fear had vanished from her eyes, and in its place sat something infinitely more dangerous, certainty. The conductor looked to the orchestra. No one moved until Eleanor Voss, still staring at Clara, whispered almost involuntarily, "Play it." The old conductor gave one slow nod. Bows lifted. Fingers found keys. Victor stepped backward because suddenly he did not know where else to stand. He still believed he controlled the stage, but the stage had already begun sliding out from under him, inch by inch, note by note, toward a woman he had invited there only to be laughed at. And when the first orchestral chord rose beneath the chandeliers, the ballroom did not laugh at all. The opening strings floated upward in a tender minor chord, soft as candle smoke, and Clara Bennett closed her eyes for one heartbeat, as if stepping through a doorway no one else in that ballroom could see. Victor Langford stood 3 feet away with his polished grin still fixed in place, but it had begun to feel borrowed now, something stretched over confusion. This was supposed to be a joke with a shaky voice, a few missed notes, and a ballroom full of amused applause at her embarrassment. Instead, the air itself seemed to lean toward her. Clara opened her eyes. The first syllable left her lips so gently that several guests did not understand at first what had happened. Then the note expanded. It rose clean, luminous, impossibly controlled, threading through crystal glass, silk fabric, camera wires, and chandelier light with the kind of effortless precision that only decades of discipline could create. Every fork stopped. Every whisper died unfinished. Even the cameramen forgot to adjust their rigs for nearly 2 full seconds, because this was not a caterer nervously humming on command. This was a voice built for opera houses, a voice that carried sorrow and silver at the same time, a voice so pure that it made the ballroom's expensive elegance feel suddenly cheap. Clara did not move dramatically. She did not perform for sympathy. She simply stood there in her plain black uniform, one hand at her side, the other holding the microphone like it weighed nothing, and allowed the music she had buried for 10 years to pour out with terrifying grace. The Italian words unfurled beneath the chandeliers like prayer. A donor near the front slowly removed his glasses. A socialite who had been smirking seconds earlier felt her mouth fall open. At the orchestra pit, the first violinist missed his page turn because he was staring. Eleanor Voss pressed her fingertips against the tablecloth, eyes widening not with casual surprise, but with the sharp disbelief of someone hearing a ghost. Victor swallowed. He looked toward the control booth, perhaps hoping for a producer to cut to commercial, cut to applause, cut to anything that would restore his command. But nobody moved. The director in the booth had one hand frozen above the switchboard. America was watching, and America was no longer watching Victor Langford. Clara climbed into the higher phrase, and this time the sound did not merely fill the room. It claimed it. Her soprano soared into the domed ceiling with such crystalline force that several guests instinctively sat straighter, as if church had begun without warning. There was warmth in the note, but also old hurt, the kind that can only be carried by someone who has loved something deeply enough to lose it. She sang not like a woman trying to impress strangers, but like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. Victor's face lost color 1 degree at a time. He attempted a supportive nod for the cameras, but his jaw had tightened. The segment he designed to make her look foolish was turning him into the smallest man in the room, and he could feel it happening live, second by second, with no script to rescue him. Clara moved into the final sustained line, and the orchestra followed her now, not the conductor. That was the strangest part. Professional musicians who had spent careers obeying batons were instinctively chasing the shape of her phrasing, adjusting to her breath, surrendering to her authority as though they had rehearsed with her for weeks. Eleanor Voss stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped across the marble floor. Several heads turned, but she did not notice. Her lips parted in visible shock. "No," she whispered to herself, eyes locked on Clara's face. "It cannot be." And Victor heard those 4 words with a chill that television lights could not hide, because he suddenly understood that whatever woman he had dragged on stage for laughs, she was not a nobody, and this performance was only the beginning of what he had failed to recognize. Clara released the final note with such delicate control that it seemed less like an ending and more like the chandelier air itself had chosen to keep singing after her lips closed. Then came the silence. Not polite silence. Not uncertain silence. A full, stunned, breathless silence that swallowed 700 guests, 6 roaming cameras, an entire orchestra, and the most talkative host on network television. Victor Langford stood frozen beside her, microphone hanging uselessly at his side, his practiced smile gone now, replaced by the unmistakable expression of a man realizing too late that he had invited the wrong person into the spotlight. Clara lowered the microphone slowly. Her chest rose once, steady and composed, but inside her something far older was trembling. She had not sung in public since the night she walked away from the Metropolitan Opera after her husband's funeral. The same week reporters turned her grief into headlines, and every standing ovation began sounding like pity. For 10 years, she had chosen smallness. Small apartments, small jobs, small conversations. It was easier to become invisible than to survive being recognized for the wrong reasons. Yet now, under the white blaze of national television, she had done the one thing she promised herself she never would again, and the room that had laughed at her 30 seconds earlier looked as if someone had opened heaven by mistake. Eleanor Voss pushed back from the VIP table so abruptly that nearby donors flinched. The silver-haired critic, whose reviews had ended careers and launched legends for 3 decades, stared at Clara as though seeing a face from another lifetime. "Clara Bennett," she said, louder this time, her voice carrying clean across the ballroom. Head snapped toward her. "That is Clara Bennett." The name moved through the guests in fragments at first. A whisper here, a repeated murmur there. Then the recognition began detonating from table to table like dropped crystal. Older patrons who funded Lincoln Center turned pale. One retired conductor covered his mouth. A Broadway producer actually stood up. Victor looked from face to face, trying to calculate what he had missed, but the answer was too large for him now. He had not just mocked a waitress. He had publicly toyed with a vanished operatic phenomenon whose sudden disappearance 10 years earlier had become one of the music world's enduring mysteries. Eleanor took 3 steps toward the stage, eyes shining with disbelief. "You disappeared," she said. Clara met her gaze but offered no dramatic flourish, no diva smile, no triumphant tears. "Yes," she answered simply. The single word landed heavier than applause. Victor finally found his voice. "Well," he laughed weakly into the microphone. "Looks like we had a hidden celebrity in catering tonight." The joke died before it reached the back tables. No one laughed, because everyone could hear the desperation under it. He was trying to turn an earthquake back into a punchline, and the room refused to help him. Clara glanced at him then, not angrily, not vindicatively, but with a calm that made his tuxedoed confidence look juvenile. Victor had spent years believing the stage belonged to whoever held the microphone. He was learning, in front of millions, that true authority required no jokes at all. The orchestra members began tapping bows against music. Stands, a spontaneous musician's tribute. Then one guest started clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the ballroom erupted into a standing ovation so thunderous that the crystal water in untouched glasses trembled. Guests who had smirked at her now rose to their feet, as if standing were the only available apology. Clara remained still, receiving none of it with vanity, because this applause was not victory. It was revelation. Victor turned toward the cameras, face tightening as he realized every monitor in America was broadcasting not his charisma, not his comedy, but his humiliation. And just when he thought the night could not slip further from his control, a producer's frantic voice crackled through his earpiece with words that made the blood drain from his face. Victor, social media knows exactly who she is, and they are tearing you apart. Victor Langford's hand flew instinctively to his earpiece as though pressing harder might somehow change the producer's words. But panic has a way of sounding the same no matter how expensive the equipment. Across every major social platform, clips of the segment were already spreading faster than the network delay could contain them. Side-by-side comparisons had appeared within seconds. Clara Bennett in a black catering uniform beneath the caption "Waitress humiliated on live TV." And Clara Bennett 10 years earlier in a white opera gown beneath the caption "America forgot who she was mocking." Victor could almost feel the invisible tide turning against him in real time. The standing ovation still thundered through the ballroom, yet to him it no longer sounded like applause for Clara. It sounded like the floorboards cracking under his own career. He forced a laugh into the microphone. Thinner now, less host, and more hostage. Well, this is certainly one way to boost ratings. A few polite chuckles surfaced from guests too uncomfortable to do nothing, but the room had changed loyalties. They were no longer looking to Victor for permission on how to react. They were looking at Clara Bennett with a kind of reverence usually reserved for people who return from legend. Eleanor Voss reached the foot of the stage, eyes still fixed upward. "Do you have any idea," she said, almost breathless, "how many conservatories still teach recordings of your Tosca?" Clara's expression softened, but only slightly. "That was a long time ago." "Not to music," Eleanor replied. Nearby donors leaned in shamelessly now, eager to witness history rearrange itself inches from their dessert plates. Someone from the orchestra whispered Clara's name to a cellist who nearly dropped his instrument. Victor felt every second becoming more dangerous. The teleprompter was blank. The control room was screaming in his ear to keep talking, keep smiling, keep ownership of the broadcast. But ownership was exactly what had vanished. Clara had not raised her voice, not demanded respect, not announced who she was. She had simply existed with excellence, and that made Victor's earlier mockery replay in everyone's memory with unbearable clarity. "This ain't a talent competition, Victor," one producer hissed into his headset. "You look cruel. Fix it. Fix it." As if there were a polished television line capable of erasing the image of him circling a woman half his size, while 700 wealthy guests laughed at her discomfort. Victor turned toward Clara with his brightest emergency smile, the one he used on scandals, awkward interviews, and malfunctioning cue cards. "Clara, I think America would love to know where you have been hiding all these years." It was a clever question on paper. It shifted focus. It suggested collaboration. But Clara looked at him with eyes so level that his smile began collapsing before she even answered. "Working," she said. Just that. One word. Working. The ballroom absorbed it with a collective intake of breath because everyone suddenly saw what the sentence really meant. While the cultural elite toasted each other under chandeliers and television hosts mined ordinary people for laughs, a world-class artist had been carrying trays, filling water glasses, and learning how thoroughly society ignores those in service uniforms. Victor nodded too fast. "Well, I suppose all roads lead back to the stage." Clara held his gaze. "No," she said quietly. "Some roads lead away from people who only notice you when they need a joke." There it was. No shouting. No speech. Just a sentence so clean it cut through tuxedos, diamonds, and camera cables alike. The room went dead silent again. But this silence was different from the one after the aria. That silence had been awe. This one was judgment. Victor blinked, lips parting without words. Several guests lowered their eyes. A woman at table 12 actually winced. In the control booth, someone muttered, "Oh no," because they knew exactly what every viewer at home had just felt. The humiliation had reversed, and it had reversed with surgical calm. Victor Langford, king of televised embarrassment, was now the one standing under the spotlight with nowhere to hide, and Clara Bennett had not even finished speaking. Victor Langford opened his mouth, closed it, then forced out the kind of laugh people use when they are praying no one notices they have been hit. "Well," he said, tugging at his tuxedo cuff, "Clara Bennett has jokes too." But even he could hear how empty the line sounded, how painfully it bounced off the marble columns and disappeared without a single willing chuckle to catch it. 700 guests watched him with the same fascinated discomfort people reserve for a magician whose trick has gone catastrophically wrong. He was still holding the microphone, still standing center stage, still technically the host of the evening, yet authority had drained from him so completely that he looked like an employee who had wandered into the wrong camera shot. Clara Bennett remained beside him, calm and still, no trace of triumph in her posture, which somehow made everything worse for him. If she had gloated, he could have played the victim. If she had shouted, he could have regained control through charm. But dignity leaves very little room for defense. Eleanor Voss climbed the final 2 steps onto the stage, ignoring every producer motioning nervously from the wings. "Clara," she said, voice trembling now with the emotion of a critic forgetting to be critical, "the entire music world believed you were gone forever." Clara looked at the chandeliers for a moment, as if deciding how much of herself the room deserved. "I was gone," she answered. "People just never notice where quiet women go." The sentence drifted over the ballroom like smoke and settled into every polished conscience present. A hedge fund manager who had laughed at Victor's first joke stared hard into his untouched cheesecake. A famous actress near the front folded her hands, visibly ashamed. Across America, living rooms that had tuned in for celebrity banter were now watching something far more uncomfortable, a social truth no one had prepared to hear. Victor's producer barked in his ear again. "Apologize." Now, his jaw clenched. Public apologies had built and repaired careers in this industry, but Victor understood instinctively that a rehearsed sorry would sound microscopic next to what had already happened. Still, he had no choice. He turned toward Clara, cameras zooming greedily for the moment. "Miss Bennett," he began, suddenly formal, suddenly sweating beneath studio powder. "If my attempt at light-hearted fun came across as disrespectful, I sincerely apologize." Came across. Light-hearted fun. The language of a man still trying to soften his own reflection. Clara studied him, and for 3 long seconds she said nothing. Those 3 seconds felt longer than her aria. Finally she asked, "Did you ask the billionaire at table 6 to sing?" Victor blinked. "No." "Did you ask the senator?" "No." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Did you ask me because I looked entertaining, or because I looked powerless?" A hush fell so complete that the hum of an overhead camera motor became audible. Victor's lips parted, but no professionally trained wit arrived to save him. Because some questions are too honest for television. He glanced toward the audience, perhaps hoping someone would laugh and release him. No one did. Eleanor Voss folded her arms. Several guests stared directly at Victor now, not as fans, but as jurors. Clara took one measured step closer, still not angry, which made her words land with even colder force. "People in uniforms serve your drinks, clear your plates, carry your bags, and disappear before dessert," she said. "You learn to look through us. Tonight you looked through the wrong woman." Somewhere in the ballroom, a glass touched marble with a tiny accidental clink that sounded louder than thunder. Victor's throat moved. His face had gone the pale gray of printer paper. On a monitor near the wings, producers watched the live comment feed exploding so fast it blurred. Some demanded his firing. Others praised Clara. Millions were clipping every second. This was no longer a gala. It was an autopsy of arrogance conducted under crystal lights. And Victor Langford, once the man who controlled every room with a joke, stood speechless in the center of his own unraveling as Clara Bennett slowly handed the microphone back, making it terrifyingly clear that she was not finished with him yet. Clara Bennett placed the microphone into Victor Langford's unsteady hand with the same calm precision she had used to place silverware and champagne flutes all evening, and somehow that simple gesture humiliated him more than any shouted accusation ever could. She did not slam it. She did not toss it. She returned it like a professional returning borrowed property, silently reminding the entire ballroom who had entered this stage with manners and who had not. Victor stared at the microphone as if it had become foreign metal. For years it had been his weapon, his shield, his license to dominate every room through timing and sarcasm. Tonight it felt heavy, almost incriminating. Clara stepped back half a pace, enough to give him the floor, but not enough to give him relief. Because now every eye in the ballroom was waiting to see whether America's beloved host could survive a room he no longer controlled. He tried once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice slightly rougher than before, "what an unforgettable surprise this gala has given us." No applause followed. The sentence hung there, thin and lonely. Victor glanced toward the wings where producers gestured frantically for him to move on. Cut to commercial, announced the charity total, do anything except remain trapped in this moral spotlight. But moving on requires cooperation from a room, and the room was not done watching him sweat. Eleanor Voss remained on stage, her gaze cutting between Victor and Clara with open disdain. "Surprise?" she said sharply. "No, Victor. This was not a surprise. This was a revelation." Several guests nodded. Someone near the back actually murmured, "She is right." Victor inhaled through his nose, trying to summon the smooth authority that had carried him through award shows, celebrity scandals, and political interviews. It did not come. Clara, meanwhile, looked toward the orchestra pit where musicians still sat motionless, bows resting in their laps like witnesses after testimony. She could have soaked in the applause. She could have taken the spotlight fully and reclaimed the career mythology being handed back to her by the second. Instead, she turned to the conductor and offered a small, grateful nod, the kind one working professional gives another. That tiny courtesy broke something in the audience. A second standing ovation surged up, louder than the first, because people suddenly understood that they were not cheering merely for a vanished soprano. They were cheering for restraint, grace, and the unbearable elegance of someone who had every right to make a scene and chose not to. Victor was left standing beside that applause like a cardboard decoration from the wrong event. His earpiece crackled again. Network executives are online too. They want damage control after the break. Damage control. The phrase landed in his stomach like ice. This was no longer one awkward gala moment. Sponsors were involved. Headlines were being written. Morning shows would dissect his expression frame by frame. Clips of him mocking a service worker while America rediscovered her identity were already too perfect for the internet to release. Victor looked at Clara with something dangerously close to pleading. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly, forgetting to perform for a second, "perhaps we can discuss this privately backstage." Clara met his eyes. "You wanted this publicly," she replied. "Why would I hide it privately?" A visible shiver moved through several guests. Victor's shoulders sank 1 inch. That inch told the whole story. The host who once stood 6 feet tall in every room had begun shrinking under the weight of his own choices. Clara then did something no one expected. She stepped to the front edge of the stage and looked out across the ballroom, not at the billionaires, not at the cameras, but at the rows of catering staff frozen near the walls holding trays, folded napkins, coffee pots, and dessert plates. Men and women in plain black uniforms. Invisible all night. She gave them the faintest smile. Several of them blinked hard, stunned to be seen at all. And in that single glance, the room understood that this story had grown far beyond Victor Langford's embarrassment. This was now about every person society looked through without consequence. Victor followed her line of sight and realized, too late, that he was no longer facing one woman. He was facing every quiet person he had ever turned into background scenery, and the silence gathering again around him promised that the final blow to his pride was still coming. Victor Langford stood beneath the chandeliers with every polished instinct failing him at once, because there are moments when charisma cannot outrun truth, and this was one of them. Clara Bennett remained at the front of the stage, her quiet smile still resting on the rows of catering staff along the ballroom walls. Some of them looked stunned, some looked emotional, and some simply stood straighter than they had all night, as if one invisible thread of dignity had suddenly been pulled tight through every black uniform in the room. Victor cleared his throat and lifted the microphone again, but his hand betrayed him with the slightest tremor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing each word through a smile that no longer convinced even himself, "let us remember tonight is about charity." Clara turned her head slowly toward him. "Exactly," she said. The single word struck with almost surgical neatness. A few guests actually exhaled in disbelief. Victor's eyes flickered. Clara continued, her voice calm enough to make everyone lean closer. Charity is easy when cameras are watching, she said. Respect is harder when no one important seems to be looking. No one moved. The orchestra did not shift. The servers did not blink. Even the producers in the wings stopped waving cue cards because there was no cue card for a sentence like that. Victor lowered the microphone an inch. He wanted to interrupt, wanted to reclaim hosting duties, wanted desperately to steer this glittering disaster back toward donation pledges and celebrity banter, but every possible interruption would only make him look smaller. Clara stepped down from the center mark and began walking toward the stage stairs. Her sensible black heels made soft clicks against the polished floor, each one sounding strangely final in the hush. Victor watched her descend, and in that moment panic overruled pride. "Clara, wait," he blurted, too quickly, too publicly. She paused on the second step and looked back. Millions of viewers saw it then. America's unshakable television king asking a catering waitress not to leave him alone with the consequences. "I truly am sorry," he said, this time without the polished language, without the scripted shine. "I made a mistake." Clara studied him for a long second, and there was no cruelty in her face, only a tired kind of clarity. "No," she answered softly. "You revealed a habit." The ballroom seemed to inhale all at once. A habit, not an accident, not a misunderstanding. A habit of looking down. A habit of choosing the powerless for entertainment. A habit of assuming uniforms meant lesser stories. Victor's shoulders dipped as though the word itself carried weight. Clara descended the final step and walked toward the service corridor where she had spent the evening unseen, but now every person in that room tracked her movement as if royalty were leaving a coronation. One by one, the catering staff set down trays and coffee pots and began clapping for her. It was not thunderous like the donors' applause. It was steadier, deeper, more human. Soon some guests joined in, then more, until the ballroom filled with a rising wave of applause that no longer celebrated celebrity at all. It celebrated recognition. Eleanor Voss wiped one eye discreetly. Victor remained stranded on stage, tuxedo glowing under lights that suddenly felt interrogative instead of flattering. His earpiece crackled one final time. "Victor," the producer whispered grimly, "network wants you off camera after commercial." He closed his eyes for half a second. That was the corporate translation for suspension, investigation, headlines, sponsors, statements, and months of public damage. When he opened them, Clara Bennett had nearly reached the corridor doors. She did not turn around again. She did not reclaim fame.